I need cash flows to come in. I need these employees to work harder or else we're going to shut the doors. Like that's a bit of the vibe that I assume a lot of people might be in right now. How do you get somebody to consider these types of principles and ideas when it seems like everything around them is telling them to go into wartime CEO mode?
Right. Great question. It starts with one question back, Jason, which I love to say to CEOs when I'm talking with them, which is this. So what would you do if you weren't afraid? How would you be handling these problems? How would you be interacting with your customers? How would you be interacting with your employees if you weren't afraid? People go into that war mode, go into panic mode, and we've all been there. I've been there myself when you're afraid. And so you got to get yourself into a state of, okay, and you know, we've talked about this in the past. We don't have to go through the whole thing, but I have 5 questions in my book of how you shift your mindset in seconds from fear to freedom. If you aren't noticing and addressing the way that fear is controlling and impacting your decisions, you'll never get out of it. And I find, Jason, just by shining that spotlight, just by taking that moment to kind of go, gosh, it seems like there's fear calling the shots here right now. What would you do? How would you solve that problem if you weren't afraid? You know, typically I'll see the CEO, they step back, oh my gosh, if I weren't afraid.
I need to interrupt you really quickly. I need to interrupt you because for those of you who are listening to the podcast, you won't get to see me and Traci interact. And for those who are watching on YouTube, depending on how the edits were made, you might have seen that I stepped back and then I started writing this question. What would you do if you were not afraid? Traci, I'm dealing with some, management issues right now. And I've stepped into fear, and I asked this question very selfishly, and I am taken back to our first episode, which is the power question. And I want to put a link to that. So if everybody hasn't seen the podcast episode that we did in one of those 5 first ones, this was exactly what we talked about. I forgot it. And I realized that this is such a powerful question to ask, not only as a manager, but also as a salesperson. If you're trying to sell your product and service and you are impact driven, and you can actually ask this question as a pattern interrupt to your prospects, which is like, listen, I'm not forcing you to make any decision on this product, but I'd like to ask you, if you were not afraid, what would you do? Is
Bam.
magic. So I'm sorry for interrupting. I'm usually not someone who would, but I just want to talk about how much of an impact it's just had, the fact that you've mentioned this right now.
I love it, man. Bam. Exactly. When you're selling, to say to a client, what would you do if you weren't afraid? I mean, that's game changing, right? And people, oh my gosh, if I weren't afraid, I'd invest the money and go forward, you know? And it's interesting because I do sales every day, all day, right? Where it's like, okay, so how would you, on the other side, how would you position your products? How would you price your products, if you weren't afraid? How would you structure things? What you get what I'm saying? Like, how would you move forward if you weren't afraid? And I will tell you, Jason, when it comes to selling, when you're in a place where you have developed your product from a place of total freedom and not fear, it is so much easier to sell. It is so much easier to sell. And I can say that because I'm there. It's taken a long time to get there, but we are there. And when we sell, there's no fear because I absolutely know what our product is, what we deliver, the price, the value, boom, done.
I'll just elaborate on a little thing I picked up on what you said is that you've finally gotten there. And, somebody who's listening to this might be at the beginning stages of their business and they might be selling a product and service. And listening to this episode, they're like, okay, let's fix this now. And then tomorrow I'll be able to sell better. Is this a process that will be that fast? Or do you think that there's a level of patience and things that need to be put in motion? And if that's the case, why would it take so much time?
Do you mean in terms of the product they're selling or how they want to sell it?
To get to this place where you're released from this fear in the way that you're approaching your business?
Yeah, I think it can happen in a moment. And I've seen it. I've literally taught this to thousands and thousands of leaders around the world. When you ask yourself, what would you do if you weren't afraid? And you find your answer, you've done it. Boom, it's happened. And I know as an entrepreneur myself, I've been in business for 26 years. As you keep going and as you keep growing, you hit different levels of fear. You're going to keep hitting fears because as you keep challenging yourself to get better and better, there's new fears that are going to come up. And so you have to keep asking yourself this. I mean, I've been asking myself, what would I do if I weren't afraid for 20 years? And it's been a pretty cool journey as a result. And so I think you can get there in a moment, but people where they get tripped up, Jason, is when they're so identified with fear, when they've created a sense of identity so much around fear that they can't even detangle, is that a word? Detangle themselves from it when their sense of identity comes from the fear.
Thank you for that clarification, because there's a part of me that was like, okay, I solved this, I'm good. And then I never need to counter this again. And I was like, I don't think that's how my reality works. And I don't think it's how the reality for most works. But understanding that in the moment you ask this question, you can have the instant insight, but you're going to be facing, it's almost like a whack-a-mole game as you're pursuing your path. And with that, at least you know where your target is. And it's understanding that you got to release yourself from that fear in the process.
It is whack-a-mole, but if you don't play the game, like, you never get to that next level. Like, you just stay. If you never whack back, you're just going to stay. So you got, yes, sometimes it's exhausting because you're just like, oh my gosh, but hey, this is the journey we signed up for. If you're listening, you're an entrepreneur, you're selling, guess what? This is the journey we signed up for. So you better have those tools to help you. And everything comes back to handling fear. Every single thing comes back to handling fear. Everything. Self-worth, self-confidence, where we're taking our companies, how we're getting to the next level, and definitely selling. My gosh. I mean, I remember when I first started off selling, Jason, way back when, I used to put on music to pump myself up. Like, I didn't have any methods. I didn't know how to sell. I would play the song from Wicked, Defying Gravity. I'd be like, okay, I'm not afraid. No matter what they say, I'm just going to say next. If they say no, I didn't know how to do it. And so, but what do? You overcome the fear step by step by step. And now I get to work with some of the biggest companies in the world.
It's so fantastic. And honestly, I think we can go so deep into this topic, but I'm glad that we've went back to the power question, because we talked it from an from a employee standpoint last time we had a conversation, because it was the Superhumans at Work podcast. But as Selling with Love, I am just like having an aha moment of realizing, like, wow, every time you're feeling demotivated to pick up that call, every time you're having that hesitancy about following up, once you start realizing that the fear is what's in the way. And this is actually a very direct application of how I teach my methods as well, because fear, except I use the word love. And do you have a kind of interchangeability around the word freedom and love as well in your kind of methodology? Because to me, I have fear on one side, I have love on the other. You have fear on one side and freedom on the other. And I'd love to hear what are the subtle differences.
Yeah, well, I definitely think when we are in love and acting from love, there's no fear in love. I mean, one of my favorite verses in the Bible, right? Perfect love casteth out fear. There's no fear when we are coming from love, which is why I love what you do so much, Jason. And yes, I do contrast fear with freedom. I think the part of the way we get out of fear is through understanding. When we understand what's possible, when we understand what we're capable of, that's how we overcome that fear. And then, for me every day, I'm motivated by my purpose. I'm motivated out of love for my fellow human beings, right? To serve them through the work that we have. You talked about my vision. My vision has always been that I want to see 1 billion people or more living, leading, and working in freedom. I want to see a whole world. And that to me is love. I feel a democratic style of leadership is the most loving way that we can engage with our fellow human beings out there.
Thank you so much for listening to the Selling with Love podcast. We have some previous episodes you can tune into right here. And if you prefer the short form content where you get to the point in under 10 minutes, we do have a ton of clips from our best episodes that are being shared on this channel as well. So pick which one supports you the most. And of course, thank you for liking, subscribing, and of course, selling with love.